Hey, I'm Luke, and we're going to be going through some Visual Studio tips and tricks. At the end, I'll go into debugging in Visual Studio as well. So, let's go. Alright, so let's start off by taking a look at Ctrl-Click. This is a super useful thing to go between function declarations and definitions. It can really quickly tell you what a function does, and you can go look at it really fast and then jump back. So, for example, I have this header file and it has this function. I want to know what that function does, otherwise I'd have to go find the CPP. Well, I can Control-Click this and it'll bring me right to the CPP file, right where that function was defined, and we can see all of the code that's inside of that function. And then we say, okay, well now I know what it was, so I want to get back to that header file. Well, I Control-Click, and back I go to the header file. So that's a great application of Control-Clicking. Another great application is looking for the definition of like types and different stuff like that, really definitions of anything. But let's say we have this type uint8 and we don't really know, we want to learn a little bit more about that. We can go straight to the file where it's defined by Control-Clicking it and finding all of those different types and exactly what they are and what they mean, and even the file they're defined in. Alright, so let's move on to the back and forward buttons. Let's say you're trying to find this type, you Control-Click on it, you find the type, okay, but you Control-Click again. It's not going to take you back because you weren't coming from a definition and going to a declaration or vice versa. So instead you're going to have to use the back button, which is super efficient and nice. You can go right back to where you were, and you can even use the forward button to go back again. And so this will work actually anytime that you go to a new line. If I go down to this write.js and I click here and I go back now, it's going to take me back up to the line I was at before. So every time you select a line, you're essentially going forward or backward. Now, key bindings for this are Control- take you to back, and Control-Shift- take you forward. So if you learn those key bindings, you could be really efficient and kind of fly around the code base. So let's take a look at solutions. Solutions are essentially a packaged up project structure that Visual Studio utilizes to kind of pre-organize things for you. And this is something that people usually set up. You create a new solution and you have to kind of set it up yourself. For the purposes of this AI class, you are actually given a solution and you could just pop that open and you'll see all of this file structure already there for you. Now, if you want to be able to use the play button or the run button to run one of these sub-projects, Wumpus World or Linked List in this case, you have to make sure that the one you're running is the startup project. So you'll see that Linked List here is bolded. That's currently set as a startup project. If we wanted to change it so that when we hit this play button, Wumpus World gets ran, then we have to right-click Wumpus World and we have to go to Set as Startup Project. Once we do that, Wumpus World will now be bolded, Linked List will no longer be bolded, and this play button will do what we want it to do. And as you can see, this file structure and this organization is already there for you, so that kind of makes your life a little bit easier when you're using Visual Studio than just opening up individual files. Let's talk really quick about moving tabs. I'll make this short. Every tab has a little grabbing area, which is a little set of dots. You can kind of see it if you look closely. When you drag that, you'll see there's different menus for where you want to put this tab. And you just drag it onto one of those menus and you just let go. So in this case, I want my breakpoint tab to be on the right side, so I'm going to drop it there. And now I can drag here to resize this and make it whatever I want it to be. And that's all there is to moving tabs. Let's take a look at the search bar at the top in the middle. It's super helpful. Right now I want to be able to access my breakpoints. I want to be able to manage these breakpoints so that I can debug. And I don't have my breakpoints tab here. I can search breakpoints and it'll give me a window which I can click, and it'll bring that window up as one of my currently open windows, and boom, there my breakpoints are. So naturally, let's talk about breakpoints. You click in this gray leftmost area to create breakpoints, and you can manage them in this actual breakpoint tab, and you can actually turn breakpoints on and off. So if I want to deactivate a breakpoint but I don't want to delete it, I can hit this checkbox and it won't activate that breakpoint. That breakpoint will still exist. I can even give breakpoints labels, and I can do other things with breakpoints as well. And I'll get into that in a little bit. All right, so conditional breakpoints. They're pretty amazing. And if you were trying to debug something and you have a for loop and you need to specifically break on the 160th iteration of that for loop, and you just need to hit go, 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 go 160 times, well, that's not a good time. It's also highly reducing your efficiency. Instead, you can make a breakpoint and hit this little cog here, or right-click it, and hit conditions. And you can type a Boolean statement for what conditions you want to set. So for example, in this case, we want a conditional expression, and it's even showing you it's used the equals equals as if you're in an if statement. So in this case, I want to break on this line if length, this variable length, you can actually type in real variables into these conditional breakpoints, is equal to 160 or something. You know, imagine we were in a for loop or something like that. And then I can close this, and now that'll have a plus over it, and it will say it's only going to break when length equals 160 is true. So that's a super cool way to break only when you need to on certain conditions. All right, I'm down here now. Let's talk about debugging. So when you want to run a process in debug mode with a breakpoint set, you're just going to run it as you normally would. You're going to hit the run button, but you're going to need a breakpoint because that's somewhere where you're going to stop the process and be able to step through it. So let's run this. And as you can see, it hasn't broken yet. I can interact with everything because this particular line of code hasn't been hit, this one that I set a breakpoint on. And so when I actually do interact with something that's going to initiate that file of code, it's going to start running that code, then I will break. So I'm going to double click this, and sure enough, we've broken. Okay, so there are lots of different things we can look at here. And I'm going to start with the call stack. So let's take a look at the call stack. If you didn't have this here on the bottom, you just got to search it using the search bar like I showed you before, and then you can move it over to that side by moving it the way I showed you before. So a call stack is, you know, if you've probably learned before that it's, you know, what got you to this point. Calls called a call, which calls a call, a function calls a function, you know, so on. And so you can actually trace backwards with this call stack, which is really awesome. So we can go back to any of these calls that kind of chained into this function, this particular file. If we right click on these, it'll bring up the exact point at which we went inside of this function to get to where we are. And so this is a great way to find different things. We can even jump all the way back to main to see where in main it had started to run all of the different processes that got us to the point we're at. And that's pretty much all there is to the call stack. You have this locals tab, which you can access on the bottom usually while you're debugging. And these little drop-down menus are amazing. They show you a lot of different things. All of your different variables and the different data and all the container variables or pointers or that kind of thing are going to have drop-downs for different individual data points and values and all sorts of things like that. It's a great place to keep track of that stuff while you're jumping through. And we'll be using it in a second when we go through actually running through code. All right, so when you're debugging, you're going to have steps that you can do. You can step into, you can step over, and you can step out. Typically, step into means you're going to go into a function, right? If there's a function, it's going to go into that function. It's actually going to move the call stack. You're going to go up one and go, or down one, if you will, going into that function and actually beginning to step through that entire function. Step over is going to ignore that function. It's just going to essentially run that function as it normally would, and then the next line, it'll just jump to the next line in the current function that you're in. So there won't be any going into that function and stepping through that whole thing. Stepping out means that you come out of the function you're in, going back up the call stack to the function that called the function you're in. So I would highly recommend using these key bindings F11 and F10. It makes your life super easy. So if I want to just step over and I go to the next line here, I'll just use F10 to do that. So I'm on line 69 right now. I can go to the next line and you'll see that arrow progresses. Any variables in your local section that are changing get changed to red when they're accessed or changed. And you could just keep stepping through and you can see these new variables being set. You can see all these values changing and you can stop at any point you want. So all of this kind of stuff is really helpful and will really up your game when you're trying to figure out what's going wrong in a program. You can see exactly what's every single value of everything is and be very, very careful about the way that you want to go about finding information. You can also, let's look at stepping into something. In this case, I can do an F11 here to step into get.js contents. And a great example really quick is when you use step into, sometimes you're going to find that you go to some very strange places, because I didn't realize just then that I actually stepped into C string because this was the first thing that was evaluated. So I just stepped into C string. Now, when I hit F11, it'll step into the outer more function call, which is JS contents. So now we're going to be in there. So keep that in mind when you're stepping into something too. You might have to step through that first before you get to the thing you're actually looking for. And then we're in this function. We can step over all of this. Now that would take a really long time to get through that while loop, so we won't worry about that. But if I wanted to step out, I can shift F11 and get right out back to where I was when I called JS contents, and I can F10 to get to the next line and see what that produced as a result. I almost forgot one of the coolest things that you can do. Of course, most people know about Ctrl-F, which will find any instance of, in this case, a semicolon, right? You can Ctrl-F to find anything in a file. Most people know that when they're, been coding for a while. But what some people don't know about Visual Studio is that you can Ctrl-Shift-F to find, first of all, this is a great way to find and replace something, but you can also do this by looking in the entire solution for something. I want to find any time that get.js contents was called. I can copy the name of this function and I can put it here. And if I want to find the function call, I actually should do a specifically, I should open a parentheses just because that's, this is verbatim what's getting used. When you call the function, you usually have the open parentheses. We don't necessarily know what they're going to put in the rest of the function, so we won't put out any more stuff. But we can look through the entire solution or the current project or whatever, and we can hit find all. And this will bring up a tab which is going to go through and find every single instance of this. And this is amazing because you can look in a file, you can see where the contents or where this function was called in this CPP file. You can go to the .h that defines it, and you can go to where it was called in this other CPP file. So it's a great way to quickly find instances of something, and it's a great way to traverse a large code base. So definitely use that as well. All right, that's pretty much it for Visual Studio tips and tricks and debugging. Basically, if I had any other advice, it would just be learn your key bindings. All of these things kind of have key bindings associated with them. You really should challenge yourself to learn them because it will make you a ton faster, and it's really satisfying when you feel like you know exactly what you're doing in software. And so you definitely want to use anything you can to get better at traversing a large amount of code quickly and finding definitions and declarations. So that would be my last point of advice, but Visual Studio is going to help you out. I hope your projects go well, and have a great rest of your semester.